Okay, welcome back, everyone. And so I thought what we would do now, by the way, I just realized I neglected to record the first hour of the class. So those who aren't here will never know about the Battle of the Little Bighorn, I guess, unless I record my own private version of it to post. What do you think? Yes, no, let them learn it some other way. Okay. Okay, so let's see. Why don't we start with, let's see, Patrick and Tessa and Jeff, you guys went to the Bridgewater conference. You want to tell us what you learned there?
So I did the session on October 18th, and the first part was called Reclaiming and Reviving Deep Indigenous Histories on Turtle Island. And so this woman, Paulette Steeves, who's an archaeologist, was basically talking about a lot of myths that we've accepted that have been told by Western archaeologists about Indigenous people. And so, like, one thing that she talked about, which was really important, was how, like, we've constantly been told that, like, Indigenous groups came from Asia, and that's been used as a way to disconnect Native people from the land. And she was saying, like, their culture was created here, so, like, this is their land. And that was just something that she really emphasized throughout the session, which, like, I had never really heard it be told from that perspective, so I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second part was called Historical Trauma, The Wounds That Won't Heal. And this one was a bit heavier. There were three different speakers, and they were kind of talking about how, like, the effects of colonization have kind of just impacted each generation to come, and, like, talking about the trauma there. And we watched this documentary called Dear Georgina, and it talked about this woman, Georgina, who was taken from her family at 2 years old and sent to a boarding school where her culture was kind of just erased. So she had to, like, try to learn it herself as she got older.
Mm-hmm.
And they were basically talking about how in order to, like, have reconciliation, we have to learn the truths of what happened so that we can move forward and not rely on the government to, like, bridge that gap. Like, we have to do it ourselves, kind of. um and I'm trying to see if there was anything else. um yeah, they said, like, we have to say, like, we need to do more than just say I'm sorry and, like, give money. Like, we need to actually listen to how this has, like, impacted these groups of people to, like, move forward. So yeah.
Okay, thanks. And so Jeff, Patrick, you guys went to different sessions. Did anyone else, Lucy or Andrew or Alessandra, did you went to the October 18th session as well? Okay.
No, I did not.
Okay. Why don't we have, let's see, Patrick or Jeff, since you were also with Tessa, tell us what you learned.
Right. So, kind of on Tessa's note that she just had, that we really need to listen to Native people. One of the main points of my session that I went to, which was on the 4th of October, was the doctrine of discovery, which, if you don't know, it's something that was posed by, I believe, the Pope in 1462, saying to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and destroy all ... and pagans you find.
Yeah. So he says that actually before the discovery of the Americas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is taken into America as, like, one of the, I guess, like, leading thought processes of how they should take the land. And you might think, well, this is from 1462. It's not applicable today. We don't care about this anymore. It was actually used in a court case just this year. The McGirt versus Oklahoma case.
Yeah.
That was again used in 2005. Was, I think, the last time it was used. So it's not just about listening to Native people. It was one of the biggest points from my day. We really have a lot of systemic problems in our constitution and in the way our government works that we really need to address. Part of that is we have these doctrines that are heavily racist from before the country was even founded that are still important today. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jeff.
So what I attended was the October 3rd conference, which was kind of like the intro to the Bridgewater State Conference. And in that conference, they focused on 2 panels, which were creation stories and traditional life. And I don't really remember much about like the specific creation stories that they did talk about, but from what I gathered from the conferences was that they really focused much on like connecting to their traditions of ancestry and how they relate what their creation stories are to what they strive to do today. So one of the speakers, she's a Wampanoag tribe ancestry, and she's well known in trying to revive the Wampanoag language. And basically what the speakers did talk about a lot during their conference was how they perceive their creation stories versus how they perceive European creation stories and just European Christianity, and just how they perceive it in a way that's like kind of how I guess Europeans would perceive their creation stories in like a very stereotypical way. But it was interesting and kind of, I don't know, I guess weird to see it as an outsider view.
Okay. Very good. Did anyone else, let's see, Lucy or Andrew or Alessandro, go to the October 3rd session? Or let's see. Why don't we move on to your group? So Andrew, Alessandro, you guys went to the same session.
Yeah, October 25th.
Okay.
So the 25th session was also split into 2 parts. The first part was about like the wampum beads and the wampum belts that they used to make, which I thought were pretty cool because the speaker went into depth on like the different sizes and the colors and like abstract versus figurative belts, like what they all mean. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then the second panel was talking about St. David's in Bermuda and like the Bermudian indigenous people, and kind of the same thing, like reconnecting with the culture and how they want to bring it back. And they also talked about doll making and like craftsmanship there. And I thought that was kind of interesting because they both, or at least the speakers made it sound like each like artist or like craftsman was really important.
Interesting. Alessandro, do you have any further thoughts on?
Yeah, so for my report, I focused like a lot more like in depthly with the second half of the conference. And just how like one of the speakers, which was the chairman of the St. David's committee for, I forget what the word they used was, but reunite their brothers and sisters, basically just teaching the heritage to people who don't know about it. I just focused a lot more on how what she was saying could actually benefit people of like an indigenous nature, how like the mission statement of the island helps with kind of native. Something I said specifically was how over the course of time of natives losing land, they lose more of their culture, and the website and the island in general is helping everyone get back on track on it.
I see. Okay, good. Let's see, Lucy. Now, what did you learn?
I went to the same conference as Tessa, the October 18th one,
Okay.
and she covered most of it, so I won't bore everybody by going over it again. But yeah, the first one was really interesting to me because I think it was last semester, I was in a biology class where my teacher taught us about the Clovis first theory, which is the theory that Dr. Steves is against and says that it doesn't really have any substantial evidence to back it up. And so I thought it was really interesting because I had kind of believed that that was the truth. Yeah. And then I hear this really compelling evidence from Dr. Steves that basically they see people from 100,000 years ago. They see evidence of people having been here. So it's a neat, a sad tool, I guess, of cultural erasure that I guess I hadn't thought about before, is seeing it from a scientific perspective.
Interesting, yeah.
And then the second workshop, I guess I didn't see much different in the second workshop than I think Tessa did, but I definitely found the second workshop to be pretty sad. And for the most part, it seemed like the people that were there kind of spiraled and got into kind of a mindset of hopelessness. And a lot of the conversation that was going around was less about what can we do to make these institutions better, and more of like, oh, it seems like the government isn't going to help us and there's nothing we can do. It seemed a little bit, I don't know if Tessa got the same impression, but definitely to me, I thought that it was kind of depressing. And I would have liked to see them explore options for the foster care institution a little bit more than they did. It's just kind of sad.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Very good. So why don't we move on, and let's see, Harrison and Shadi, you each read books. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you found, what you read, and...
Got it. So I did a book review on the Cherokee removal. And basically the book is basically in like stages. So first it's like historical like moments or documents. And then after that, it goes to historians, journals talking about going like in depth through every single event that has happened throughout the Cherokee. And like,
who wrote the book?
It was Theda Purdue.
Okay.
And there was somebody else who had edited it.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, basically, it starts with you know, how Europeans started to invade the Cherokee, their lands, and just taking them and killing all the people in it. And then it goes to when the U.S. began to have problems and tried to take lands from them again. And mostly the southern part of the U.S. was the problem, had the most problem with them. Like Georgia was one of the biggest competitors.
Well, the book is about the Cherokee, and that's really where they were. So yeah.
Yeah. So Georgia basically tried to come out with a bunch of laws. Like in 1802, they tried to create a law saying, okay, so basically, if you don't sell us your land, we'll just kill you and then we'll take your land. So it's basically, it's a win-win situation, basically. Or you sell it, or we're gonna take it, like no matter what. So, and then it goes at the end, it's a bunch of letters from slaves at the time, Native American slaves. There's this lady, I think her first name is Elizabeth, and then she talks about how the U.S. troops at the end came into their house and tried to take away their family. She's talking about, okay, like her mom trying to tell her dad not to fight them because they will kill him. And then they take him out of their homes, and that's like, it goes into the Trial of Tears. I think most of y'all know what it is.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Good, thanks. And Harrison, you read Anton Troyer's book?
Yeah, I did.
So what are your thoughts?
So I thought it was really well done because, like, first his purpose almost was to like foster understanding between I guess like white people and Native people, and to show that like they're not really that different. Because like it's like, for example, one of the questions he answered was like, do Native Americans still live in teepees? And he's like, well, do Europeans still live in straw huts? Yeah. And like he then like, where are the real Indians, like the Wild West horseback raider type?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, where are the French knights, and why are people living in castles anymore?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, it's almost like people forget that culture also progressed through history and in a similar manner that others did. So he's like, so he uses that as a method to say, oh, these people aren't that different, and Native peoples have been persecuted throughout all the United States government, and he like gives examples of how he personally have been affected by that. So like it would be, I saw it as like an effective method to make people want to see change, and then which he also provide resources at the end of the book for people to do that. So,
now, did it make a difference having kind of met him vicariously through this class, or was it?
It did, actually, because I could imagine him speaking. Like I read his answers the way he spoke. So, and like it just helped even put more of a personal effect to his answers.
Good. Okay, thanks. Very good. Any questions for Shadi or Harrison? Okay, well then, let's see, Savannah and Trevor, you guys went to the event last night, right?
Yep.
So what was it all about?
So I think like a lot of probably the conference segments, or I don't know if you call them segments, but sessions, where it was about breaking down common misconceptions. So they cleared up a lot more, like specifically Massachusetts things. One of the things they started with was by saying that we are in the land of the Massachusetts, dropping the S because that's the name of the nation that lived here. And like, even when they showed us maps, they didn't put the American borders. They just kind of showed the whole landmass and then labeled where their cities would have been.
So that was interesting. No, I was just saying that's interesting.
Yeah, but I think a big part of it was trying to get white European descended people to look at it from the other perspective.
Was that effective?
Yeah, I think so. Another thing, like they said that we refer to their leaders as chiefs a lot, but that's our word. Their word is Sachem. So they just the way that we think about everything is wrong too, not just the things that we think. Was a point that I think that they really tried to stress.
Okay. Savannah, do you have anything to add? Any different perspective?
Not really. I agree with all of that. I thought it was interesting though, because like what Trevor said, it was like about like in Massachusetts area kind of, and then they were also like went from like the past to like now, and things that like they're still trying to have people understand today too, because it's still like an issue that people like don't seem to really like notice often.
What do you mean?
Like, so like the issue on mascots, that they were talking about that and how it's still like a common issue today, and that like preserving the land and how it's very hard for them to preserve land, and they have to like go to like, a bunch of meetings for that, and that if like they're already starting to tear stuff down, it gets even harder to try and preserve it, and that like people visiting places will like take stuff that they should just keep there because it was meant to be there, and how it's like disrespectful and people don't really realize that. That's like what I got.
Very good. Now, were you guys glad you went, or did you wish you'd stayed home watching reruns of Friends or something else?
No, I thought it was pretty interesting.
Okay, good. Okay, no, it sounds like everyone got something out of what they did, which is good. Lots to think about. So I'm glad that these opportunities came up. So let me think. So I look forward to reading what you have to say in your papers too. Okay, so let us see. And I think last time, a week ago, as Lucy reminded us, we were about to talk about the Dawes Allotment Act, which was, earlier in the century, the dislocation of Indians, the removal of the Cherokees, which Shadi was talking about, and then the Sioux Wars. We can kind of see this as this open hostility, but then these other things that happened toward the end of the century, the Indian boarding schools and the Dawes Allotment Act, are all things done by the friends of the Indians. That is, people who have, in their mind at least, the best interests of the Indians at heart. And so it should cause us to think about, a lot of things here. So Henry Dawes was, as you know, a senator from, what state was Henry Dawes from?
Massachusetts.
He was from Massachusetts, yes. And here, okay, so this is toward the end of the 1880s, when we've established the reservation policy. So we have the Indians on reservations, and this was at the end of a long period of warfare. I just spent an hour talking about the Sioux Wars, trying to get the Sioux onto the reservations. And we could go group by group. The Navajo we talked about last time, the Apache, the Modoc, the Nez Perce. I mean, much of this warfare between the end of the Civil War and the 1880s is about trying to get the Indians onto reservations. So now they are. And here, the Dawes Act is an attempt now to get the Indians really to take this step toward civilization, which is what their friends of the Indians sincerely wanted them to do. So here, whenever the Indians were on a reservation, the Dawes Act says the president is authorized to have the reservation surveyed and to allot the land on it. Remember, the Indians held this land in severalty, that is, it was held by the tribe. And in this case, under the Dawes Act, each head of a family would be given a quarter of a section. A section is 480 acres. So if you're the head of a family, you get 120 acres. If you're a single person, over the age of 18, you get 1/8 of a section. You can do the math. That's going to be half of what the head of a household gets. So that's, someone here must know math. If a quarter of a section is 120 acres, how much is 1/8 of a section?
60.
Yeah, okay, that sounds good. That's good. You didn't go to MIT, but you got that one. You nailed that one. If you're an orphan, you also get 1/8 of a section. Now, when the lands are only good for grazing, an additional allotment might be made to individuals. And if within 4 years the Indians fail to select land, then it will be up to the agent or the special agent to make a selection. So the purpose of this, and remember, Dawes is a senator from Massachusetts, and in Massachusetts, you could have a good dairy farm or a good wheat farm on 120 acres. So he's calculating, well, that's what you would need here. 120 acres would be pretty significant holding in Massachusetts, enough to support a family. So therefore, in any of these other Indian reservations, that should be enough for a family. And give any of you who is a single person without family obligations 60 acres, you'd be able to make a go of it. And this then, of course, would allow the United States to sell the remainder of the land because it's excess. Of course, the problems here are that this isn't good farmland where you can have a 60-acre or 120-acre farm and produce stuff, because it's a different climate. And you can't really, and when he says, if it's suitable for grazing, you would need more grazing land for cattle or whatever. So the law itself, on its surface, it is intended to help the Indians by turning them into self-sufficient farmers. But then it also is going to stop them from being Ogallala or Hunkpapa or Nez Perce or Navajo, and have them as individual farmers on their 120-acre plot. And I'm pretty sure that Senator Dawes had the best possible intention. I mean, he is not scheming now to buy this excess land or have his friends, buy this land that now is going to be available for other things like grazing. And just as we have a whole spate of movies about Indians versus cowboys, we also have a whole spate of movies about the ranchers versus the farmers. And that's actually a story that goes well back before the United States was formed. You may recall the first recorded murder in the Bible is the rancher versus the farmer, Cain versus Abel, right? And so you have this story. So from Cain versus Abel to the story of Shane, again, throwing out references to, the Bible, I know pre-exists all of us. So is anyone here familiar with the story of Cain and Abel? Anyone not familiar? First time you've heard those two names? Trevor says kind of. Lucy says kind of. I don't blame you. I blame your teachers and your parents, but that's a different story for another day. I've thought about running for office saying that I blame most of our problems in society on teachers and parents, and want to see how far I get. Anyway, so we have this long-standing fight between the grazers versus the farmers, and this is what, the Dawes Act in some ways is part of this, because we want the Indians to become farmers. And seeing if you are, Dawes is not a Marxist, so let me hasten to say that, but if you are a Marxist, and I'm not going to ask you if you're Marxists, because the deans told me I can't ask those kinds of questions anymore. You see that there's these iron laws of history, and the society progresses from the hunter-gatherers to the grazers, to the farmers, to then the commercial world. And then Marx predicted where it was going to go after that. And it turns out he was wildly wrong. But there's an element of truth in what he was saying about the evolution of society. And what Dawes is hoping to do is have the Indians turn from the hunter-gatherers into grazers, and then into farmers, and then ultimately become civilized. And the end of this, just as the end of the whole Indian school movement and the breaking up of the No More Treaties, was to turn them eventually into citizens. And the idea of citizens for Dawes is these are independent yeoman farmers, the farmers of Massachusetts, who really are an important part of the society. They're independent, they have their stake, and they're not beholden to anyone. And that was Dawes's vision for the Indians, and he very much is one of the friends of the Indians, and seeing this as essential to, as someone else said, killing the Indian but saving the man. So that's the Dawes Act. And this whole idea of civilizing and pacifying the Indians happens at the same time as one of the real phenomena among the Indians, which is the development of the ghost dance. And the ghost dance actually begins in Nevada among the Paiute. And this is the Mason Valley in Nevada is a narrow strip about 30 miles long, walled in by mountains. By the way, during the break, I was able to figure out how to get my PowerPoint to work, but unfortunately, I don't have anything to show you about the ghost dance. And to the south of the Mason Valley is a sacred mountain. The mountain, it's sacred to the Paiute. And this is where the Father first gave them fire and taught them how to live. And prophets will go up to the mountain, and sometimes they'll come back with revelations. And again, this is a tradition among a lot of Native Americans. You go off on this spirit journey and then come back with some kind of a message or revelation. Now, the big problem in Nevada in the 1860s is the entrance of miners, because Nevada has, anyone, by the way, been to Nevada? No one has? Interesting. So more people in this class have been to North Dakota than have been to Nevada, which is really an extraordinary thing. I am going to alert the Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce that they have a lot of work to do, at least among this cohort. So miners are coming into Nevada because there's a lot of silver in Nevada. Also some gold, but silver is the thing drawing people there in the 1860s. And the miners and ranchers are not trying to displace the Indians the way the people moving into the Great Plains are, the people who had moved into Georgia or into New England or the Ohio River Valley were. They're wanting to put them to work as ranch hands and working in mines or working on ranches. And of course, Indians are good with horses and so on. So it's not a different way of life. In 1860, a group of miners capture some Paiute women, and their husbands raise a party, go to rescue these women, and without any punishment inflicted on the miners who had taken their women. And then the miners, though, consider this to be an outrage, that we've been attacked by the Indians, and they march toward the Paiute village to try to wipe them out. But the Paiute surprise them and kill 50 of the miners, and the rest of the miners flee. So you have this kind of tension, fighting going on between miners and Indians. And the Indians typically in the spring and summer would work for the ranchers or for the miners as ranch hands and so on, work for wages. And then in the fall, they would go hunting. Now, somewhere around 1870, one of the prophets or sages or holy men of the Paiute goes up to the mountain, and his name is Tavibo, or white man is actually how it's translated. White man, or the man from where the sun rises. And this is the phrase the Shoshone and Comanche use for white people. They come from where the sun rises. You think of it as these people coming from the east. And this is Tavibo's name. It doesn't necessarily mean he was a white man. He's a Paiute. He goes up to the mountain and he comes back with a revelation that there is going to be an earthquake, and it's going to swallow up all the white people and will leave their houses and their supplies and spare the Indians. Now, not many people believe this particular vision that Tavibo has. And then he goes up again, and then he comes back and he has a new revelation that actually, no, the earthquake is going to kill everyone. I think the thing we were skeptical about was an earthquake that's just going to kill some people, but leave behind all their stuff. I mean, that doesn't sound plausible. But this one, the earthquake is going to kill everybody, but after 3 days, the Indians are going to come back, and they'll then will live forever to enjoy the earth. There will be plenty of fish, plenty of game, plenty of pine nuts, the things that have been disappearing with the advent of the miners and the ranchers. And this does get people to believe this. This sounds plausible. An earthquake, everyone's going to die, but we are going to come back. But then after a while, people start saying, okay, so when's this earthquake going to happen, Tavibo? You said there's going to be this earthquake, and then yet another revelation about the earthquake, and haven't seen any evidence of the earthquake yet. So he goes up to the mountain and comes back with yet another revelation that, well, it's not going to be all the Indians come back. Only the ones who believe in this revelation are going to come back. And he dies shortly after this. Okay, yes, Trevor.
It kind of sounds like exactly like the story of Moses.
It is very much like the story of Moses. And of course, at this time, there's been a good amount of proselytizing by Christians. And I am sure that if you mentioned Cain and Abel to Tavibo, he would have been familiar with that particular story too. Yes. So go to the mountain, you have a revelation. And also this idea of being resurrected after 3 days. I mean, you can see this. Also, some stories are related to others. And again, we can sometimes get into trouble by trying to say, well, this is related, this comes from this story. But actually, in the 19th century, there's a major rebellion in China launched by a guy who has read some of the Christian scriptures translated into Chinese, and he has a revelation. Anyway, long story about this, the power of the story, which does make us think about the divinity of it. Anyway, this is a story for another day. That's a philosophical discussion to have. And my friends in the philosophy department have told me to stop trying to talk philosophy. So don't tell them I was getting philosophical with you about this, but you have these stories. Okay. The Indian agent, by the way, in Nevada, a guy named Frank Campbell, has been around in this area for a while. And he is really surprised that no one's told anything about him, anything about these prophecies. This is all the Paiute are talking about. He is their agent, but no one says to him, hey, you know, there's going to be this earthquake and it's going to kill everyone. He's genuinely in the dark about these revelations. Now, just a few years before Tavibo has his revelations, another Paiute is born, a guy named Wovoka. And Wovoka is born in 1856. So he's about 14 when Tavibo starts having his revelations. And he goes to work for the white ranchers. In the fall and the winter, he goes hunting and he goes to gather pine knots, which is another thing that the Paiute do. And he works for a rancher named David Wilson. David Wilson calls him Jack, so he's known as Jack Wilson or Wovoka. And when he's about 20 years old, he's married, he's still working for Wilson. And one day he's at work and he hears this great noise. And he starts to go in the direction of the great noise he heard, and he falls down dead. And while he is dead, God comes and takes him up to heaven. And he sees God, and he sees all of the people who died long ago, and they in heaven are living as they always had. They're happy, they're forever young, they're living in this pleasant land filled with game. And this is, again, you can imagine what your vision of heaven may be, or if you have one. And think about this is what Wovoka's vision of heaven is. This land, all of the dead are there, they are young, the land has plenty of game, and everyone is happy. And God tells him he has to go home and tell his people, be good to one another, live in peace with the white people. And so this is in the 1870s. This is at the same time that we have Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse fighting against the 7th Cavalry. Here God is telling him, be good to the white people, work, don't lie or steal, put aside warlike things. And if you obey all of this, God tells Wovoka, you'll be reunited with your family and friends. There won't be any more sickness or old age. And God also gives him a dance to teach the people so they will be able to achieve all of these things. And for 4 nights, you dance in a circle. And on the morning of the 5th day, you shake your blankets to ward off evil, and then you go bathe in a stream. And it's a very intricate dance. And the people have to perform this dance for 5 consecutive days in order to secure happiness. And God also gives him control over the elements. And this attracts a following among the Paiute. And in 1889, he actually has another revelation. And this is about 14 years after his initial one. And his revelation in 1889, that is, he's been teaching this dance among the Paiute, who every year will do this ghost dance as a way of bringing back those they've lost and ultimately being in this land filled with game. In 1889, the sun dies. That is, we would understand this as a solar eclipse. And during this time, Wovoka has a fever. And when David Wilson, the rancher, remembers Wovoka was sick with a fever, there was this eclipse. And then people started making noises, shooting off guns and so on. And they're thinking, this is the thing we've been dancing for. This is the end of the world. Wovoka, by the way, said God gives him control over the elements. He also is good at sleight of hand tricks. I think for those of you who are seeing this not as strictly Wovoka was brought up to talk and God told him these things, you may think one step toward becoming a prophet is being able to do some sleight of hand tricks. It would be a useful skill for you to pick up if you want to get into the business of being a prophet. And he, at the end of the eclipse, when he recovers, he asks the Indian agent to draw up a statement to forward to the President of the United States, and that for a small stipend, Wovoka will keep the people of Nevada informed of news from heaven, and also will be able to furnish rain when it's needed. So he has this connection with God. The agent never bothers to forward this message to the president, which is kind of too bad, which is probably why Nevada has, for more than a century now, lived without any message from on high. And the doctrine of the ghost dance, which persists among the Paiute, is that the whole Indian race, not just the Paiute, are going to be reunited on a regenerated earth. They'll be free from death, disease, and misery. Also, the white race is not real. It's going to disappear with the other things of the earth which have outlived their purpose. And this is going to happen at different times, but typically they say it's going to happen around July, which is usually when you have the ghost dance. And this is also the period when the tribes of the prairies will have the sun dance, you know, and they accept that the end of the world, or the end of the unnatural things in the world, and the regeneration of us is going to happen sometime in the spring of 1891. Now, the spring of 1891 comes and goes, and this doesn't happen. And Wovoka then says, well, it's actually an open question when it's going to happen. Now, the first ghost dance was held in January of 1889. The Paiute, remember, Wovoka has been saying, I have this message from God, we've got to do these things. And he does start having a dance, but it's in 1889 in conjunction with this eclipse, and then the prediction that the end of the world is coming soon, that the dance spreads west into California. As other Indians hear about this dance and hear about this doctrine of the regeneration. And the Apache, the Pueblo don't take up the ghost dance, nor do most of the Indians of the Pacific Northwest. The Mojave do, the native people who live in the Mojave Desert. In November of 1890, at the conclusion of the ghost dance, the Indian agent for the Western Shoshone and Paiute Reservation, which is on the border between Nevada and Idaho, he wrote about that 1,000 people took part in this dance. And while the best order prevailed, the excitement was very great as morning approached. When the dancers were worn out mentally and physically, the medicine man would shout that they could see the faces of departed relatives moving about the outside of the circle. No pen can paint the picture of wild excitement. All shouted in a chorus, the Christ has come. And then they danced and sang until they fell in a confused and exhausted mass on the ground. And this Indian agent writing about this ecstatic experience, these people who have danced through the night, and then they can see the faces of their departed relatives. He doesn't see any real trouble in this, except for the fact that they're missing days from work by doing this dance all night. So he sees that. But other than that, what could be the harm? Now, some of the Paiute go to Walker Lake, others go to meet Indians from Montana and Dakota. And the agent writes that the astonishing part of the business is the fact that all Indians in the country seem to possess practically the same ideas and expect about the same result. That is, this is something that started as a local thing among the Paiute with first Tavibo, then Wovoka, but now you have other Indians seeing this ghost dance as something that can bring back and regenerate the entire Indian race. And in December, the Indians decide that once a week, every month, they're going to dance until the grass grows. That is, they're going to start dancing in December and keep dancing until the spring. And every tribe that adopts the ghost dance has its own mythological foundation to it. That is, there are changes that happen to it as it is transmitted through the different Indian languages. And for the most part, it's a peaceful message of the ghost dance. We do the dance, and then we will be reunited in this regenerated earth, and then the white people who will simply disappear. The Cheyenne and former enemies in this dance is often put aside their differences. So you have the Cheyenne, the Pawnee, the Ute dancing together, and also giving up the sun dance where they would torture themselves, and also the scalp dance where they would dance they would do before war as anticipating scalping their enemies. That is, they're giving up these things as savoring of war. And some of them will go to Mount Grant. This is the sacred mountain of the Paiute, and get red powder from the mountain, spread it on their faces. And in the dance itself, you're not allowed to carry anything that's made of metal. So no knives, no weapons. Now, the Sioux get the ghost dance by way of the Shoshone, and the Shoshone share a reservation with the Arapaho. So you can see this transmission of this. And one of the things that the Arapaho have is the ghost shirt, which then the Shoshone and the Sioux adopt. And this is made of buckskin. Now, at this point, buckskin made from a male deer is rare on the prairies. So you have buckskin or cloth that is fringed with designs, and the designs on the shirt are supposed to protect you. Now, traditionally, Indians didn't wear clothing as protection. So you would go into battle, usually not wearing much in the way of protection. Your protection comes from your medicine, usually a little passel that has some powerful thing in it. And the ghost shirt might actually be something they've adopted from the Mormons, and the Mormons' religious denomination that had moved out into this area in the 1840s and had their own, the Mormons traced their lineage to, they believe the Native Americans were the lost tribes of Israel, one of the lost tribes of Israel that had migrated here long before any of the other stories we have heard. And so the Mormons do have an elaborate endowment robe that's a protective covering with symbols. And the Mormons had been evangelizing among the Shoshone and the Ute. Now, Wovoka, for his part, says, no, the ghost shirt has nothing at all to do with this. He disavows the ghost shirt. He sees that as an adaptation that someone has made. Now, in 1889, a Cheyenne named Porcupine brings the ghost dance to the Cheyenne. And in his message, the whites and the Indians are going to become one people. It's not the whites are going to disappear, but we're all going to become one people. And also, the earth is old, and the big man, the great spirit, is going to renew it. The Cheyenne are somewhat skeptical of this. And one of the accounts says that, you have the ghost dance, everyone goes around until they're dizzy, and then they faint, then they throw buffalo robes over them. And at the last dance, someone reports, okay, let's quit. There's nothing to this. Let's get out of here, go to town where we can get some work. And his friends, these guys are watching this ghost dance. They see these people now passed out on the ground. He says, I have nothing to this. Let's go to town and find work. And his friend says, have you got any money? Because we can't really go to town unless we have money. And his friend says, no, I don't have money, but this guy passed out on the ground must have some. And since now he's going on to the next world, he's not going to need it. So let's take his money. And so they start loosening up this guy's money belt, but then he wakes up and, he's not very dead. Maybe he does need his money after all. And there's another story of two Cheyenne, and they're trying to get to Nevada to find out about the ghost dance. And their horses aren't going to make it that far. So they get on a train. The conductor says, where are you going? And they say, Siano, which means the land of the dead. And the conductor thinks they said, we're going to Seattle. And the train doesn't go to Seattle, so he kicks them off. And these two guys say, if he was a real Messiah, we would have found him. So we're not going to believe this anymore because it's hard to find this particular Messiah. So you have there's also a story that, not that everyone's going to become one people, the whites are going to disappear, but there's going to be a hurricane that's going to drive the white people back across the sea. So this is the ghost dance, which is spreading among the native people in the late 1880s and early 1890s. Now, the Sioux by this time are having problems because they're on this reservation. And actually, one thing the government is doing as a way of encouraging them to settle down on allotments, as well as a way simply of saving money, is to cut the rations that every year the government provides to the Sioux. Remember, we don't want them to hunt buffalo anymore. So what we're going to do is every year provide them with beef. And so we'll bring cattle out to them. Ultimately, we want them to raise their own cattle, but they're not really taking to that right now. And so the government is actually cutting the Indian rations between 1886 and 1889. And so you have kind of hard times here among the Sioux. And the version of the ghost dance that reaches the Sioux is that the whites had been sent to punish the Indians for their sins. Now it is clear the Indians have been punished sufficiently, so their period of expiation is over and their deliverance now is at hand. And another thing the ghost dance teaches is that the white man's gunpowder no longer will work against us because we're doing this dance, as this is the end of this particular time. And about half of the Sioux are taking part in the ghost dance by 1890. In fact, in August of 1890, there are about 2,000 ghost dancers at Pine Ridge, the reservation in South Dakota. Now, this is, there's kind of a division among the Sioux. Red Cloud and Sitting Bull on one hand, and then Indians on the other hand, reconciled to the white presence. And the ghost dance is an affirmation of an Indian identity as opposed to the identity we're supposed to be developing through the auspices of the whites. So there, for example, there's a police force on the reservation, really maintained by, created by the Indian Agency, and it's Indian police officers, and they of course are part of the establishment now against those who are doing the ghost dance. And in 1889, after the Dawes Act, when the Sioux had made an agreement to break up the reservation and have the land allotted, Sitting Bull is reportedly asked, what do the Indians think about this? And Sitting Bull says, there are no Indians left now but me. As the others are all accepting that they're going to break up the land and no longer be Indians. And in October of 1890, Sitting Bull has a ghost dance at Standing Rock. And this really startles the white agents there. They see this dance as really alarming and they want to suppress it. And there's a story, well, there's a new agent at Pine Ridge, and the Indians call him Lakota Kotipa Koshkala, which means the young man who's afraid of the Indians. And he reports that about half of the 6,000 Indians are dancing and that he can't control them. And he sees this as a dangerous thing. Now, General Miles thinks that the excitement is going to die out, but young man who is afraid of the Indians every day sends a telegram to Washington saying, this is really dangerous. The Indians are dancing. I don't know what to do about it. And he asks for someone to come and explain to him, explain to the Indians, and somehow get a handle on this. That is, he sees something inherently dangerous in the ghost dance. And Short Bull, who is another Sioux leader, tells the people that the whites are really interfering too much, and this is actually going to advance the time of the disappearance of the white people and the end of the world. Now, the agent here goes to talk to Sitting Bull, and Sitting Bull says, well, why don't the two of us go to Nevada and we can talk directly to Wovoka and find out what the ghost dance is all about. We'll find out if this is the end of the world or not. Having gotten telegrams every day about the ghost dance, the War Department, which still has jurisdiction over Native American affairs, the Secretary of War does alert the president that something is happening here. And the president tells the Secretary of War that in case there's an outbreak, assume military responsibility and to prevent any more of an outbreak. And so quickly we send troops to Pine Ridge. And when the troops appear, a number of the Sioux ghost dancers go off to the Badlands. And on their way north to the Badlands, they destroy the houses of the friendly Indians. Now, it's not really a hostile movement, it's more of a stampede by these folks who see the end of the world coming. And the Indian agent forwards a list of Indians up to North Dakota that should be arrested. And some by this time are in the Badlands. And the only ones who are left here at Pine Ridge are Red Cloud, who is too old, and Sitting Bull, who's now in his mid-50s and has had a tough life. So you have this fear of something happening here among the Indians because of the ghost dance. By early December, things seem to have quieted down, although it's now thought maybe what we should do is arrest some of the ringleaders to make sure they stay quiet. And the agent, McLaughlin, thought it actually would probably be necessary to remove Sitting Bull too, because he seems to be really one causing a lot of this trouble. And but he doesn't want to take some precipitate action that could lead to something even worse. The War Department decides it's necessary to arrest Sitting Bull. And so they send actually Buffalo Bill to try to get Sitting Bull. Buffalo Bill, famous for killing buffalo, and then he had started a Wild West show in the 1870s and actually had taken Sitting Bull on tour with a Wild West show. And one of the things the Wild West show would do, it was like a big circus. It would be under a tent, and they actually went to London, and the Indians were there for months as part of this Wild West show, and people would come to see the Wild West show. And one of the things they would recreate at the Wild West show was Custer's Last Stand. Imagine that. You have some of the real Indians who participated in the Battle of the Little Bighorn reenacting in this huge tent the Battle of the Little Bighorn. I mean, this is a great historical spectacle in the 1870s and 1880s. And Buffalo Bill, who had been a buffalo hunter, obviously enough, is now sent. Well, why don't you go try to convince Sitting Bull to turn yourself in? The agent at the Pine Ridge Reservation is afraid of what's going to happen if Buffalo Bill shows up, so gets the order countermanded. And finally decides that what he has to do is actually go and have the Indian police arrest Sitting Bull. So the Indian police force of about 50 men goes to arrest Sitting Bull. And Sitting Bull has two houses. They search both of them. Sitting Bull agrees to come with them. And then he stalls. He is brought out of the house, and his followers there see Sitting Bull being brought out of the house, and he starts to struggle. And Catch the Bear, one of the Indian police, shoots, and he hits another Indian named Bullhead, and Bullhead shoots Sitting Bull, as does Red Tomahawk, and then Sitting Bull's women start attacking the Indian police with knives and clubs. So you have this melee at Sitting Bull's house, sparked because Sitting Bull had been encouraging the ghost dance, and the ghost dance was alarming the Indian agents and the authorities about what might happen among the Sioux. And the Sitting Bull's women then are attacking the Indian police with knives and clubs. The Indian police are able to disarm the women and put them in their houses, but under guard. I think I'm going to take a break at this point, and next week we'll find out what happens to, Sitting Bull now has been shot, and we have the Indian police guarding the house where his body is, and will the ghost dance lead to the regeneration of the Indian people? So that's it for this week. I really thank you for your reports on what you did. I look forward to reading what you have to say about the books, the presentations. And I'll see you all next Thursday. Okay?
Thank you.
Take care. Good to see you all.
Thank you.